The Saddle of Deceit, a $5,000 betrayal on Judge Judy. The atmosphere in the television studio was thick with a nervous tension you could almost touch. A silent battlefield where the only weapons were words and the only shield was the truth. And presiding over it all was the legendary Judge Judy, a woman whose sharp gaze could seemingly peel back the layers of any story to expose the raw, unvarnished facts hidden beneath. On one side of this legal arena sat Melvin, a young man with the weathered hands of someone who worked with the earth and its creatures, his posture stiff and defensive, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route he knew didn't exist. Opposite him was MS Erickson, a woman whose face was a canvas of disappointment and a simmering anger that had been building for years, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, holding back a storm of emotion. The case was about a horse, a beautiful creature named Eva, but everyone in the room could feel it was about so much more. It was about a promise broken, a trust shattered, and a friendship torn apart by the clanging sound of money-changing hands. The story began not in a courtroom, but in the dusty, sun-baked fields of a ranch years ago, where the air smelled of hay and leather, and where a young Melvin first met the horse's original owner, a woman going through the painful unraveling of her marriage, a divorce that left her life and her possessions in disarray. This woman, seeing the gentle way Melvin handled animals, knowing the love he had in his heart for creatures great and small, made a decision born not from commerce, but from compassion and desperation. She didn't sell him the horse. She gave Eva to him. The price was $0, but the unspoken contract was immense. It was a sacred transfer of trust, a belief that Melvin would provide the good hands she could no longer guarantee, a sanctuary for an innocent animal caught in the crossfire of a fallen-apart human relationship. For a while, it seemed like a perfect, heartwarming story. Melvin, the proud owner of a horse he had not paid for, would ride EVA through the open fields, the wind whipping through both their manes, a picture of freedom and mutual understanding. He fed her. He cared for her. He called the veterinarian when she was sick, and the farrier, the specialist who shoes horses, when her hooves needed attention, building up a history of small bills and routine care that he would later clutch onto like a life raft. But then, Melvin's ambitions began to grow, fueled by the adrenaline-pumped cash prize world of the rodeo, a world of bucking broncos and roaring crowds where a man could be a king for 8 seconds or lose everything in a single fall. He dreamed of glory, of trophies, of the respect that came with being a champion. And in this new, glittering dream, the gentle EVA no longer had a starring role. She was, as he so coldly put it, sitting on the back burner, a phrase that made MS Erickson flinch as if struck. This wasn't just a horse being underused. This was a living, breathing soul being shelved, her loyalty and companionship becoming an inconvenient burden. So Melvin, the rescuer, made a calculated decision. He would not find EVA a new good home as the original owner had done for him. No, that path was too altruistic, too sentimental for his new rodeo-driven mindset. Instead, he would lose some to win some, turning the noble act of rescue into a simple business transaction, a cold equation where EVA was the variable to be cashed in for a better model. This is where MS Erickson entered the picture, a woman whose love for horses was a deep, abiding part of her soul. She saw Melvin's advertisement, and her heart leapt with a mixture of excitement and hope. She communicated with Melvin, who presented himself as a sincere young man making a difficult but necessary decision. He spoke of the vet bills, the farrier costs, the feed, all the investments he had made. He painted a picture of EVA as a sound, reliable, and wonderful animal, a companion worth every penny of the $5,000 he was asking. MS Erickson, trusting this man who had once been a rescuer, agreed. On July 31st, 2016, the deal was sealed. The money was paid, and EVA was loaded onto a trailer, her trusting eyes looking back at Melvin one last time, unaware she was being traded for a dream she was not a part of. The first few days for MS Erickson were filled with the joyful anticipation of a new beginning. She brushed EVA's coat, whispered soothing words into her flickering ears, and planned the long rides they would share. But when she finally saddled up for that first fateful ride, her dream twisted into a nightmare. Eva was not the calm, dependable horse she had been promised. The animal was nervous, skittish, and dangerously unpredictable. There was no joyful canter through the fields. Instead, there was a terrifying struggle, a battle for control atop 1,000 pounds of frightened muscle. Every attempt to ride EVA was met with resistance and fear, a clear indication that something was very, very wrong. The horse MS Erickson had paid for was not the horse she received. The trust she had placed in Melvin began to curdle into a sickening suspicion. For nearly 3 agonizing weeks she tried, hoping it was just an adjustment period, but the problem persisted. A constant, frightening reminder of her failed investment and, more painfully, her broken trust, finally. On August 19th, desperate for answers, MS Erickson did what any responsible owner would do. She called a veterinarian. The vet's examination was thorough, and his conclusion was devastating. Evia had significant physical and behavioral issues, problems that were not recent developments. These were long-standing conditions that Melvin had to have known about. They were issues that would have been apparent to anyone who had owned and ridden the horse for years. This was the moment the betrayal crystallized. This was not an unfortunate misunderstanding. This was a deliberate concealment. This was fraud. The very same day, her hands trembling with a mixture of fury and heartbreak, MS Erickson sent Melvin a message. She confronted him with the vet's damning findings and demanded her money back. She gave him a choice: take back the horse he had misrepresented and return the $5,000, or face the consequences. His response was not one of apology or remorse. It was silence. For a full day, she heard nothing. The silence was louder than any argument, a void filled with the crushing weight of his indifference. So MS Erickson, feeling cornered and utterly deceived, took matters into her own hands. On August 20th, she loaded the problematic EVA back onto her trailer, drove to Melvin's property, and with a heart pounding with righteous indignation, returned the horse to the man who had swindled her. She didn't sneak. She states they were aware, but in the eyes of the law, as Judge Judy would sharply point out, this act was a trespass, a desperate move by a victim who felt she had no other road left to travel. She had given him back his problem, but he still had her money. The $5,000, her hard-earned savings, remained firmly in Melvin's pocket. The price tag for his rodeo dreams, funded by a lie. Now, under the unforgiving studio lights, this tangled mess of broken promises and bad faith was being unraveled by the one and only Judge Judy. Melvin stood by his story, but his defenses were crumbling with every question she fired at him like a precision laser. "You got the horse for free," she stated, her voice dripping with a disbelief that echoed through the courtroom. "Why didn't you just find her a good home?" Melvin's answer, "In the rodeo world, you have to lose some to win some," sounded hollow and cruel in this setting, a selfish mantra that justified betrayal. He tried to justify the sale by listing his expenses, the feed, the vet bills, the farrier, painting himself as a businessman merely recouping his costs. But Judge Judy saw through the facade. "You wanted to be paid back for feeding her?" she asked, her tone making it clear how petty and transactional that sounded when the original gift had been an act of pure trust. The most damning evidence, however, was the timeline. Judge Judy zeroed in on it with the focus of a hawk. "On what date did you first advise the defendants that you were having difficulty with the horse?" she demanded. Melvin squirmed, using vague words like immediately. But Judge Judy does not deal in vagaries. She demanded a date, and the truth was laid bare. Mrs. Erickson had contacted him almost immediately after the first disastrous ride, yet Melvin had waited nearly 3 weeks, until after the vet's visit on August 19th, to first raise any issue. This was not the behavior of an honest seller. It was the strategy of a con man hoping the problem would just go away. He had taken her money, given her a faulty product, and then gone silent, hoping she would simply absorb the loss. His inaction spoke volumes, telling a story of guilt far more convincingly than any of his weak justifications. In the end, the law was clear. Melvin had sold a horse he knew was problematic without disclosing those critical flaws. He had breached the contract, and he had broken the trust of not one, but two women who had believed in his character. The gavel came down, a sharp final sound of justice. Judge Judy ruled decisively in favor of MS Erickson, ordering Melvin to return the full $5,000. It was a total victory for the plaintiff, a vindication of her gut-wrenching experience and a stark defeat for the defendant, whose rodeo dreams were now $5,000 further out of reach, paid for by the price of his own integrity. Lesson for the listeners and viewers. The story of Melvin and MS Erickson is a powerful and cautionary tale that extends far beyond the price of a horse. It teaches us that trust is the most valuable currency in any agreement, and once it is spent through deception, it is nearly impossible to get back. When you engage in a transaction, especially one involving a living being or a significant sum of money, you have a profound responsibility to be transparent and honest. Concealing the truth, whether through active lies or by simply remaining silent about known problems, is a form of theft. It is stealing someone's ability to make an informed decision. Furthermore, this case reminds us that free often comes with strings of responsibility attached, and turning a gift of trust into an opportunity for personal profit is a profound betrayal of character. Always document your communications, get important promises in writing, and trust your instincts. If something feels wrong after a purchase, it probably is. Let this be a warning. The short-term gain of a dishonest sale is never worth the long-term cost of losing your reputation and facing the stern judgment of both the law and your own conscience.